Man, Cactus really, he killed me this week, man. I haven't laughed quite as hard as I did watching this episode of Overlord, specifically with the chair scene, I think ever. I mean, one of my favorite parts about Season 2, I think it was Season 2 when the Lizardman arc was going on, was he was trying to teach characters, especially like Octus, the ability to think for themselves, because they're much more useful if they're able to determine things on their own, especially given that a lot of what he needs to do as leader now, he doesn't know what he's doing because he was just an average guy, all things considered. And to see the idea of this man, Papa Bone Daddy, trying to teach these people to think for themselves, only to have it seasons later come back because this creature saw Shaltir being sat on as a chair, and his response was, "I want what she's having, sit on me, daddy, please." And when he tries to shut that shit down, saying, well, that was a punishment, he's like, well, then punish me, daddy. That is the energy this creature was radiating. And the fact that he's like, yeah, it's a pretty comfy chair, all things considered, as you have Shaltir just fuming in the background. The only way that could have been better is if you took the intro of this episode with Demiurge as well as Albedo and just threw them in that situation too, just to see the chaos that would unfold. But holy shit, this episode, while a lot of setup getting us kind of acquainted with the Dwarven Kingdom, yes, we only met one dwarf, but that was kind of like the progression to get there, and we're clearly starting a mini war arc, given that there's these creatures trying to hunt and destroy all the dwarven cities and everything like that. But it was a episode that was hilarious. It had a lot of payoff from prior seasons, and I just can't wait for more, man. Every time I think I can't like this season of Overlord any more than I currently am, I end up doing so the following episode. There's so many little bells and whistles about this show that it really does take its time to get to certain payoffs. Sometimes those payoffs are for like long-term story progression. Other times it's simple jokes like the chair scene, but no matter what Overlord does, it's been pretty fantastic, and I am really excited to see what's going to happen because the end of the episode is quite exciting because ultimately the whole idea of runes, right? It's something that he wants to explore more of and also discover what exactly happened in terms of the changes from what he used to know versus what this world's doing right now. We're learning that essentially magic kind of overtook rune crafting because it essentially just worked out better, but it's also way more expensive. So the idea of having someone telling a guy who's very much down in the dumps here, he's by himself, he wants to bring back the old ways, and this powerful being saying, I'll give you everything you need, you'll just essentially have to sell your soul to me, and this dude's like, you know what? I don't got anything else going on right now, yes please, I'll sell my soul. That means my kids can pass down their knowledge of the runes and everything like that. All things considered, the 3D with these beasts wasn't too shabby. If you really compare, I would say, any of the season's battles, it really was probably some of the better that we've experienced. It's still not as good as, obviously, the 2D that Overlord has. And while there's a couple of moments with these, like, wolf-like beasts, overall, I actually thought, yes, it was a quicker fight, so it helped. But just the way Shaltir went in and kind of captured them, it honestly looked pretty decent. And given that we haven't had too much action this season, there's been a decent taste of it, but not to the same degree as, like, Papa Bone Daddy over here launching giant abomination shadow creatures to eat apart cities and kingdoms, right? So I'm hoping that the fight that we're building up to will be able to refine it at the very least as well as this episode did, and maybe not go to some of the worst that we've seen over Overlord seasons and prior episodes and prior battles. But I'm excited to see because they really have a vengeance on these dwarves. I mean, the whole idea that apparently within a matter of hours, maybe days, it's very entirely possible that they would be annihilated. Obviously, with the help of Ainz and Shaltir and everyone else, it's obviously going to be a lot different of a situation. And in theory, the idea of saving the Dwarven Kingdom in the way that he probably will do will most likely benefit him way more than if he just kind of strolled in as an undead skeleton saying, okay, we're going to take a bunch of your skilled people and we're going to go do our own thing. So this could work out much better in their favor. But there's quite a few moments that it really felt like payoff from like prior seasons, not in the ways of like big plot revelations or anything like that, but more so just small little actions. I love the Lizardman situation where he looks at the woman who has the baby, right? Very big, important character in season 2 there. And the whole idea that she's a skeptic of Ainz and just doesn't trust that he's not going to want to take things from her. And I love how in the middle of his own thought process, yeah, it's a rare baby, but I wouldn't steal your kid. You don't gotta look at me like that. And within that same sentence, he's like, yeah, but if you had a couple of them, maybe I would actually. The dude has no chill even in his own mind, and it leaves me absolutely rolling. And the intro of this episode was pretty fun because we end the last week with the whole vassal state situation. Him not really knowing what the hell that is, hoping that someone else can deal with it, and the whole idea that you have two very different perspectives on the matter. Ainz is pretty confused, all things considered, because it wasn't really a term he was acquainted with, unless you're playing like RTS games and stuff like that. It's very possible you never come across that term. I mean, I saw a lot of people last week say they had to Google the term themselves, even though they're gamers themselves or read a lot of manga, and it's understandable. It's not a term that comes up in everyday conversation, especially for a dude who came from a pretty shitty education cycle in his original world. I love the fact that he's just thinking, well, this must have been his plan, you know. Ultimately, like, Demir was probably doing something. I'll just leave it to him. They probably know what they're doing. On the flip side, you have these two who constantly poke at each other and I feel like get under each other's skins, but very much are trying to get it like, we serve the same Supreme One. We need to understand that we need to be the best for him. And I love the fact that they just come out being like so shocked that this man was able to, within a few days leaving this section of his kingdom, was able to secure a vassal state. Like, it's just something that blows their minds. And I mean, for a dude who thinks everything Ainz does is a chess piece that he's moving around, this master level, he already has checkmate before the game even begins. It's pretty great to see all that type of stuff. But this is going to be a cool arc, though, because I think dwarves have some of the more interesting, I think, lore in terms of any story. I can think of some of my favorite games that I play. I love stuff like Dragon Age Origins and like the dwarven stories there. So I'm interested to see what Overlord will do, because I imagine even if there's a massive battle with a lot of casualties, he probably will save a few dwarves, or at the very least a few clans, something like that. And I'm interested to see how much the anime will dive into like the history and the lore, why they decided to pack up and move. Is it because of this oncoming battle they were trying to save themselves? There's a lot of different things that could happen, and I'm excited to see, because just in my personal opinion, I think dwarves, even though they're not really that relevant in terms of fantasy stories, often like you can look at most isekai fantasies, and honestly, unless you're getting like a medieval style video game, dwarves aren't brought up as much as I think they probably should be. You mostly see elves and humans and things like that, but personally, the way they go about their crafting and like their history, like kings and queens and how that all works, I found that to be way more interesting than elf stories half the time, because most of the time I just think elves in any story they just kind of come across as assholes. Sometimes they feel like they got the short end of the stick and it's the humans that are more of assholes, but I just find like dwarves are like the most interesting of like that dynamic, and they're just so underutilized. So getting into a dwarven art, to me, that's just a recipe for success, given how Overlord handles political conflict, on top of just, they're kind of badasses. They're short, but man, they pack a punch, especially if you give them a big enough axe, and I'm kind of excited to see what they're going to pull with that. Overlord, to me, has been peak isekai for some time, like even earlier into the seasons, but goddamn, it just feels like this show does get better with time, and it's nice to see that like it never really rushes into like its final end goal, or its final, like, this is clearly the big end objective for Ainz. You never quite know where he's going next, and in doing so, you get all these different self-contained stories. This season has definitely put a lot of focus on Ainz rather than a lot of the other side characters where he usually wasn't incorporated until later, and for that, it definitely makes it even more enjoyable. But I love the balance no matter what they do, whether Bone Daddy's on screen or Bone Daddy's doing his own thing and people think he's master chess player. Either way, the show is absolutely awesome, and this was one of the funniest episodes, if not the funniest episodes, just for me personally, but excited to see where this setup's going to pay off in the future. But thoughts down below, whether you read that source material or if you're anime original, do let me know what you're feeling. Leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you're new around here. Till next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.